I thought, well, this is wonderful. I don't want to leave here. What's next? And the instant I would have these thoughts or ask these questions, they were answered almost immediately. And when I asked that question, well, what's next? I began moving again. And at that time, I was shown scenes in what I would call a life review. Only these were images from the lives of other souls in the Matrix.
Life is hectic, so wherever tomorrow takes you, be ready with Factor's chef-crafted and dietitian-approved meals delivered right to your door. With over 35 options a week, including keto, calorie smart, vegan and veggie, and more, they've got a variety that fits your lifestyle. Factor has restaurant-quality meals ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. They also have various easy options for the entire day, from breakfast to midday bites, smoothies, and more. Factor is less expensive than takeout, and every meal is a nutritious and delicious experience, and it won't break the bank. You can customize your meals by choosing 6 to 18 per week. Plus, you can pause or reschedule deliveries anytime to fit your schedule. Factor meals are 100% hassle-free, giving you more time for what matters. Head to factormeals.com/otherside50 and use the code otherside50 to get 50% off.
My name is Deborah King, and I'm going to talk today about my near-death experience that occurred in 2008. But before I talk about that, I am just going to talk a little bit about two experiences that I had before my near-death experience that I think worked in my life spiritually to provide the context for me to really appreciate the experience. And the first was a car accident that I had at age 17. I was a passenger in my father's car, and I had a day off from school, and it was January of 1972. And we were stopped at a red light at an intersection. My father was one of those that waited until the light turned green and he kind of looked both ways because he was always conscious, particularly at that intersection, of somebody speeding through and trying to run the red light. Well, that's exactly what happened. We were sitting there, the light turned green, and that's the last thing I remember. As it turned out, we were hit broadside by a drunk driver. I was sitting in the passenger seat and I was not wearing a seatbelt. And we weren't real great in the 70s about wearing seatbelts. We didn't have airbags. The seatbelts were not even passive. But as it turned out, destiny, if I would have been wearing my seatbelt, I would have been killed instantly because when the truck hit us, it flattened the passenger side car really down to the bottom of the vehicle. And I would have been right underneath that. I would have been pinned under that. So I was thrown almost completely into the back seat. I had numerous orthopedic injuries. But I, at some point, remember being above the accident scene. The last thing I remember was sitting at the red light, and that's it. The very next thing I remember is being out of my body and seeing the wreck. It was a horrific accident scene. And I was looking down at this, trying to make sense of what was going on. And I was watching my father, who miraculously he had some injuries, but he was able to get himself out of the vehicle and he was running around and holding his head. I could not hear any of the dialogue of what he was saying. I was kind of this insulated space, but I could see everything that was going on and I recognized my body. And although I couldn't make sense of it, I was really more concerned about my father. I wanted to let him know I was okay and that I was watching everything and that I was okay. I really, looking back on it, couldn't make sense out of it, but I knew that it was very real. It's hard to tell how long, the time was that it passed, but I was quickly back in my body and I opened my eyes and I was aware of a lot of blood, a lot of glass that I was laying in. I knew I had been in a horrible accident, but I had no idea how it had happened. And then I heard my father's voice saying, "Oh, Debbie, thank God you're going to be okay," when I opened my eyes. So that was a very quick and out-of-body experience that was quick and confusing. You have to remember I was 17. I really thought for a long time afterwards, as even though it seemed very real to me, and it was very real, I thought maybe, was I dreaming that? Did I imagine it? What exactly was that? And the terminology out of body didn't really even exist at that time. So I really never shared that experience with anybody. I began nursing school and left my home state of New York and moved to Maryland to work as an intensive care unit nurse at Johns Hopkins. And one night we were resuscitating a man in his early 40s who was very ill, but we didn't really expect him to have a cardiac arrest. And he did. And the resuscitation was long and problematic. We were having a great deal of trouble sustaining a viable rhythm, getting his hemodynamics, his blood pressure back. It was a very, very trying and a very discouraging resuscitation. And at some point in the resuscitation, I was the charge nurse that night. The routine was that the charge nurse and the chief resident ran the code. The chief resident looked at me and he said, Deb, it's not really going very well. I think we should call it, meaning, we should call for the time of death. When I heard those words, something came over me that was probably the most powerful, intuitive knowing I had ever experienced. The knowing, it was kind of a voice that I heard that said, no, you have to keep going. You're going to get him back. And there was nothing objectively that was happening in that resuscitation room that told me that. And so it confused me. It really actually startled me. But before I could even stop to analyze it, I heard the words coming out of my mouth. I looked at the resident and said, can we just go one more round again? And he looked at me with a kind of a discouraged look on his face and gave a little wink. And he said, all right, Deb, we'll go one more round. And we did. And we got him back. And, applause broke out in the resuscitation room. I couldn't believe it. Nobody could really believe it. And I was thinking to myself, well, it's a good thing you listened to that voice, whatever that voice was, because we got this man back. And that was a moment that I will never forget. And that the man, after the resuscitation, began to stabilize, but he wasn't waking up. I was off the next day and I came in for work the day after that, and I heard and report that he had actually woken up, was doing quite well, was actually already off his ventilator and was able to speak. And I couldn't wait to go into his room. And I went into his room. The first thing he said when he looked at me was, "Nurse, you're the one." And I kind of froze and I thought, oh, gee, what did I do? I was completely mystified by this. And I said, well, I'm the one. What did I do? And he said, I heard you. He said, they wanted to give up on me. They wanted to stop. And you said, let's go one more round. And I could hardly even take this in. I said, well, you heard that? And he said, yeah. He said, I watched the entire thing from right up there. And he pointed to the corner of the resuscitation room right above the cardiac monitors. Now, at that moment, something deep inside me said, I know what he's talking about. I was out of my body in the car accident. I know exactly what this man is telling me. It's true, but I didn't hear any words. I had a very brief, very not as deep of an experience. I knew this was true. I did not doubt it. I had experienced something very similar, but there was a part of me that still really didn't believe that first experience completely. And now here was this patient telling me this. And I said, well, what else did you see? And he proceeded to tell me in very graphic detail everything that happened in the resuscitation room. The drugs that we were giving, not by name, but he described what the drugs looked like, the ampules, the paddles. He described the anesthesiologist, what he looked like. He even told me where I was standing. And I thought, okay, I know what it's like to be out of my body, but this is another level of detail that I just remember saying to myself, this changes everything. But I didn't tell anybody about it. I certainly didn't want anybody to think I was crazy. And this was right around the time or right before the time that Raymond Moody's book had come out. And the term near-death experience was not something that was in the language of healthcare professionals. It was not something I was aware of. I really didn't know what had happened, but I believed every single word. That really acted as a catalyst in my life to move out of acute care and to move into the community. And I started working in community health and hospice for many years, which then led me actually to pursue a degree in clinical psychology so that I could spend more time connecting with patients about what was going on with them psychologically and spiritually. It was a very rigorous program, and I was really getting my footing in my new career. And the year was now 2008, and it was a tsunami of stress. It was the year of the financial crisis. My husband was working as a bank regulator, and he was deeply entrenched in the banking crisis, traveling throughout the country. My youngest bonus son, who lives with autism, was really derailing in a very major way. It was very difficult for him and for our whole family. I was working at that time as a therapist in private practice, and it was just a tsunami of stress. It's the only word that I can think of. And I wasn't taking good care of myself. I was taking care of a lot of others, but I wasn't taking care of myself, and particularly my father, who I mentioned I had the car accident with. And I was very, very close to my father, and he was dying that year of pancreatic cancer. And he lived with us. I was his primary caregiver, and he transitioned in June of that year. So it was December of 2008, and the holidays were approaching. It was my first set of holidays without my father. I was very deeply depleted energetically and depressed, and wanted to visit his grave. And so I took a drive 2 hours up to his grave where he's buried next to my mom, and 2 hours back. I was alone. I entered my house, and my husband looked at me and he said, well, I'm glad you're home because it's getting dark. You really look very tired. And a lot of this I don't remember. I have splinter memories because it's been many years now. So some of this has come back, but certainly not all of it. And he said, you better go to bed early. I don't really like the way you look. And he said, I hung up my coat, put my purse down, and walked up the steps. And he said, years later, Deb, that kind of freaked me out a little bit because I always was trying to get you to go to bed earlier and take better care of yourself. And you never really were very good at listening to that. So when you just automatically listened to me, it scared me a little bit. And that intuitive knowing that my husband had actually wound up being a very important piece in saving my life, because when I went upstairs, he said, do you mind if I just kind of stay with you for a little bit? You just don't look well. And I said, well, I'm going to read for a little bit and try to kind of relax a little bit. It's been a very tough day. My heart really felt like it was breaking, literally. And he sat down next to me and started reading. And within 10 minutes, not even, he said, I put my hands up to my head, said, oh, gee, Bob, I feel so dizzy. And I slumped over the book and I wasn't breathing. And I was in a full cardiac arrest. My husband is not a healthcare professional. The interesting thing is that I had taught him CPR because I taught everybody in my house CPR. Nobody in my house was going down without a fight. Why? My father had a cardiac history. He lived with us. My husband had a cardiac history. I wanted the children to know what to do, how to access the emergency medical system. I never thought in my wildest dreams that he would be using the skills that I taught him to resuscitate me. I did not have a cardiac history that at all would lead one to believe that I was going to have this event. The team took a good 10 minutes to come to the house, and the resuscitation was very, very rough. There was a lot of intuitive, and I can say judgment, but really intuition on the part of the advanced cardiac life support team in continuing with resuscitation, because it was not going well for me either. And they really, really kept trying hard, and they got me back. But I didn't wake up. And so this was such an interesting parallel to what I had experienced with my ICU patient. But it was worse because I didn't wake up for much longer, and I remained in a coma. And during that coma is when I had what I'll call my near death experience. I can't tell you when it began or really when it ended, except that I remember returning to my body. But it started with being in a black void, place of black, kind of velvety softness. I say void because I didn't really see any margins. It was just, or any boundaries. I just felt like I was floating in this black space. And I guess I can laugh now because my sense of humor was intact, because I remember thinking, okay, I think I'm dead. And then, but I wasn't frightened. There was no fear at all. And what does a good nurse do when you're not sure of a diagnosis, or you do an assessment, you do a physical exam? So I thought, okay, I'm going to check. I'm going to check for my body. And I felt for my head and my arms and my legs. No head, check. No arms, check. No legs. Okay, assessment correct. You are out of your body. Now, this didn't frighten me. I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. And now to even say those words, I mean, I have to laugh, because I had concluded that I was dead. I was indeed dead. I was indeed out of my body, but this did not frighten me. I just thought, wow, what's next? There's nobody here. And I sensed that I would not be in this place long. I kind of knew I was in a holding place, or I was in a place of transition, is a better word. And the next thing I remember is moving. I remember just floating and moving. I was aware of a little bit of light coming from my consciousness, because I experienced myself as pure consciousness, no body, just awareness and light, just light. And I started moving into what I would describe as a spider web of light, just a beautiful matrix of light that was just streaming everywhere. And I was embedded in it. It was pure energy. And I thought, wow, what is this place? I had no idea where I was. And I soon became aware that the lights in the matrix were alive, very much alive, that they were souls. And I don't really know how I knew this. I just knew it. And I think that was representative of much of the experience, that I got information. It's kind of like downloaded. I don't really know how I knew these things, but I understood this to be true, and I didn't question it. Some of the souls I actually recognized. Some I recognized from my earthly life, not in their body. So I wasn't in my body. The souls were lights. And when I say I recognize them by their energy, kind of like an energetic signature, like everybody had a fingerprint, or they were as unique as a snowflake. And I knew who they were. And some I knew that I knew perhaps from another time, another life, but I felt an overwhelming feeling of being at home, just returning to a place that I had been before, and just feeling more and more at home, more and more delighted, and more love. The souls and the lights in the matrix were really suspending me, is the best word I can think of, in this cocoon and web of love that was just so overwhelming and powerful that I've never really experienced anything like it in my earthly life. And I thought, well, this is wonderful. I don't want to leave here. What's next? And the instant I would have these thoughts or ask these questions, they were answered almost immediately. And when I asked that question, well, what's next? I began moving again. And at that time, I was shown scenes in what I would call a life review, very quick flashes from my life, from this earthly life. But from what I can remember, they were not major events. They were little small events from my life where I had either made a choice that was what I would consider the compassionate or the loving one, or where I had made a choice that maybe could have been a little bit better. And I wasn't being judged by anybody for any of these things. In fact, I had a profound sense that not only was I with these souls, but that I was in the presence of God and in the presence of the divine. And I had been raised as a Catholic and always was religious and spiritual, but I did not see any religious figures in this experience. This was all largely on a feeling level. And what I could see, I was not seeing with my human eyes. It's really hard, very hard to describe. But I was seeing almost with my soul. And I felt that I was being seen by God and by the divine at my core. And I was being seen for the essence of who I was. And so when these flashes from my life review came up, some of them were a little bit difficult for me to look at. And I thought, oh, geez, I remember this one. What did you choose that for? But nobody was judging me. I was judging myself. So that was really part of my review of my life. And then the interesting thing, in front of the lights in the matrix, I was shown very quick flashes of life experience in the same way that I was shown my own. Only these were images from the lives of other souls in the matrix. And some of these were, again, difficult for me to look at. Some of them were joyous occasions, births and celebrations, and some of them were very traumatic experiences where I remember feeling the experience of that other soul and what it was like for them to have that experience or to be victimized in that way. And in my own life review, I also had felt the experience of the other. So I was experiencing it, but I was experiencing it through the souls of the others, not myself, or both, I guess would be a better way to describe it. And I remember being very upset by some of the things I was seeing happening in the lives of these souls in the matrix. And when I felt that, the words came into my mind, into my consciousness: don't look at the bad events, look at the lights, look at the souls. And I did. And they were bright and they were beautiful. And the message then came to me, you see, nothing at all can harm the souls. The body can be harmed, the mind can be traumatized, but the soul remains immortal and intact, and nothing can ever destroy it. And I remember just taking those message in and being so warmed and encouraged and moved by that, because this was not only people who had experienced some horrific things in their life, but there were some people who actually were the perpetrators. So there were people who were victims, and then there were also people that I experienced who were perpetrators. And that was hard for me to take in, but I was clearly given the message that nothing could harm the soul and that these were choices, and we all have free will, that we can make choices about how we experience our life. And so I took that message in. I thought, this is really truth. I recognize this as spiritual truth, and made the decision in that moment that I was going to stay there and that I was going to learn everything I could learn, and didn't think anything about my earthly life. I didn't really think about my life, my children, which sounds so counterintuitive, but in that space, I really was so connected to what was happening to me on a soul level that I really thought, well, I'm home. And once now I'm here and I'm not leaving. And as soon as that thought occurred, I became aware of moving again. And I was moving away from the larger matrix, and two light energies started to approach me. And I knew that they were going to dialogue with me. And when I say communicate or dialogue, there was no speech. This was all soul to soul. And the first soul that spoke with me, actually, I was very delighted to recognize immediately as my ICU patient that had the near-death experience that he described to me 30 years prior. And I was so happy and delighted to see see him. And his message to me was, well, don't be surprised. I'm here to tell you that when that experience happened to both of us, it happened for a reason. And you kept that to yourself for many years. And now it's time to stop. And you've got to share that because that can help a lot of people. And my first response was, well, that's great. I'm going to do that. And again, instantly I realized, well, wait a minute. If I agree to do that, then I have to go back and I'm not going back. And he responded to that and he said, well, you don't remember this, but you already decided this. You already decided to go back, and it's okay that you don't remember, but it's okay. And I know you can do this, kind of a lot of positive affirmation. And I wanted to engage him and kind of talk about it some more. And he moved away. And the second soul that came to speak with me was my beloved father. And I was so incredibly overjoyed to be in my father's presence. And I was, Dad, it's you. And he did not at all seem as surprised as I was to see him. It's almost like he made a point of being there. Like he knew I was going to be there. And he said, well, I'm here. I've never really gone anywhere. I left my body, but I've never left you. And I never will leave you. And don't be afraid to go back and do this work because I will never leave you. I can't be separated from you. And you can't really be separated from this place of love and light. It's part of you. You couldn't be separated from it if you wanted to. And I didn't really understand completely what he was saying, but I trusted his word. If my father was going to tell me this, then I was going to trust him. And the second I made that internal decision to trust that, I was above the ICU bed. So I was out of this space of love and light, and I was above my ICU bed, looking at my body, hooked up to a ventilator, hooked up to arterial lines and central lines and a lot of equipment that I recognized. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I don't know how this happened, but this is not good. And for a second, I got very encouraged because I thought, well, this is not going well. So you don't have to go back in there because that body is not going to work. In a coma, my eyes are taped shut. I'm on a ventilator. I was clearly unresponsive. And so I became very excited. Well, okay, I don't have to do this. This is not going to work, guys. As soon as I had that moment of kind of sarcastic insight, like, sorry, it's not going to work, I was plunked right back in my body. And I would say it felt like a suction. I felt like I was kind of entered into my body, sucked back in. And at that point is the first time in the entire experience I felt fear, pain, confinement. I mean, I was in this expanded spiritual state with no limits. And now I'm in this tiny, tiny physical body, feeling pain, couldn't breathe. I was petrified. And I thought, okay, somewhere around here, there must be an exit button. I've got to get back to where I was. And before I knew it, I was pulling out my IVs, pulling out my tubes, and pulling out my breathing tube. And I looked at it, it's kind of on my lap. And I thought, oh, well, that's not good. And the team came running to my bedside and they kind of looked like they saw a ghost, actually, when I laughed. But they were like, can you breathe? What's your name? And I was thinking to myself, well, why are these people so upset? I'm fine. Of course I'm breathing. And as it turned out, I learned that I had a cardiac arrest at home. I had an anoxic brain injury, so I had tremendous problems for the first 6 months to a year of my recovery. But my memory of my near-death experience remained completely intact. In fact, that was more accessible to me than what I ate for breakfast that morning or what one of my children said to me after I recovered. And I wrote about it and journaled about it, but didn't really talk about it for many years. And there's so many important takeaways, I think, for all of us, particularly for those in healthcare. And, as I said, that the term near-death experience didn't even exist when I experienced this with my ICU patient in the 70s. And now as a nurse educator, this is not something that's integrated into our curricula, nor is it in our education of psychologists, mental health care professionals. We're getting there, but we still have a lot of work to do. We have to listen to people. These experiences are real. They are life-changing. There are spiritually transformative experiences after which people are never the same. And not only do we need to hold space for them and listen and validate their experiences, but we need to learn from them. They can teach us so much about what it really means to heal and to listen and to nourish ourselves as healthcare professionals, because this is a time in healthcare where, especially in the post-pandemic world, and there will be certainly more to come, unfortunately, but our healthcare system is in trouble and patients are falling between the cracks, and we need all the spiritual sustenance we can get so our patients can help us as well. So that's just another reason for us to listen and to hold space and to learn all we can from these experiences. And so many people are having them and coming forward and sharing them. And these are all gifts. They're gifts to all of us. We never lose our loved ones. This is just such a gift of my experience. Our loved ones that depart from this world and transition out of their body are with us spiritually. They are here. They are as close as our next breath. A day does not go by that I do not feel deeply connected to my father and to others that I have lost in the physical world. They are here. They're guiding us. They're helping us. We're never alone. And that is something I tell you from the depths of my soul. And it doesn't mean we don't grieve and we don't deeply grieve their loss in our physical life. It just means that their spirits are with us. Why? Because, we are primarily spiritual beings. We're not bodies with a soul. That's what the biggest takeaway for me, one of the biggest ones. We're not bodies with a soul. We're a soul with a body. We are primarily spiritual beings. And for a very brief period of time, we're in our physical bodies. We probably do that more than once. We probably incarnate into our physical bodies more than once in more than one lifetime. But we are spiritual by our essence. This is who we are. And it would make sense that our loved ones would be with us because all that they're missing is their physical body. So I think those are two important takeaways. And I think I would love to hear from anybody. You can reach me at drdebking.com. I think that will be included below in the description. And I'd love to hear from anybody, particularly healthcare professionals who may have had similar experiences themselves or with patients. And I thank you for this opportunity to share my story.